this working? Yeah, that works. I am Bruce Doby. I am the former editor and publisher of the Nashville Scene, which is a local alternative news weekly. Before then, I was a political writer at the Nashville Banner, and now I am resurrecting the old Nashville Banner, where I am the editor and publisher. We currently have a few stories up at thenashvillebanner.com. So it is my distinct honor today to introduce Curtis Wilkie. By way of introduction, just let me say one of the most influential books I ever read as a young lad growing up in southern Louisiana was this book, which was The Boys on the Bus. I've never really known how Timothy Krause pronounces his last name, and so much to my this book, at the time I couldn't decide whether I was Bob Woodward or Hunter S. Thompson, and envisioning myself to be the mutant love child of them, I set off and embarked on a career in journalism, but absolutely loved this book, and this book in itself was a form of new journalism at the time. As part of that new journalism, it took an introspective look at the craft itself in a way that was part gonzo and part long-form literary nonfiction. It was just a fabulous book. It's so meaningful and this book in large measure inspired me to want to be a political reporter. So it's really a great honor to introduce Curtis in large measure because while Timothy Krause largely pillories the pack mentality of reporters who were on the bus in 1972 covering the presidential campaign, this man emerges as a journalistic hero. Krause writes about sitting down next to a 30-ish dark-haired reporter wearing a Palm Beach suit and a drooping mustache who looked too hungover to object to my presence. After a long silence, he spoke up in a twangy southern accent and introduced himself as Curtis Wilkie. He was from Mississippi and had been senior at Ole Miss in 1964 when General Walker led his famous charge on the administration building. He then goes on to mention his career beginning as a reporter in Clarksdale, Mississippi at the Register. And of course, at the time, he was working for a daily in Wilmington, Delaware that was owned by a conservative Republican paper. He says about Wilkie, about his efforts to report uniquely on the campaign trail and not report what the pack was reporting. Nothing seemed to deter him. Nothing drove him from the safety of back to the safety of the pack. Wilkie continued to trust his own judgment and write about whatever he himself thought was important. In October, when he was one of the few reporters to file a full account of the Nixon rally where the president smiled at the sight of demonstrators being beaten up, the paper printed his articles without questioning them. So, long time. Covered 8 presidential campaigns, I believe, 26 years at the Boston Globe. His new book out is an anthology of many of the stories he wrote at the Globe and elsewhere. Would you please welcome Curtis Wilkie?
Bruce, thank you. Wilkie. Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. It's always nice to be back in. Always nice to be in Nashville, and I'm honored again to be invited back to the Southern Festival of Books. This is a collection of my stories drawn over a period of more than 40 years. I am a Southerner. I was a senior at Ole Miss when James Meredith integrated the school. If those of you who were at the earlier session, you heard some talk about my alma mater. I assure you we're much better than we were then. As a young reporter, my first job was in Clarksdale, Mississippi for a small daily, the Clarksdale Press Register. And as a result, I was fortunate enough to cover the civil rights movement almost daily. And I covered other things too, I can assure you, everything from civic clubs to obits to raffle whatever. But the civil rights story was the big story in the Mississippi Delta, and it was the biggest story in the country. So I was extremely fortunate to be there then, and it really became a frame of reference for me for the rest of my life. Clarksdale was the home of a wonderful man named Aaron Henry, who was the state president of NAACP, and Aaron not only became a great source for me, but a great friend. He made sure, as a young reporter, that I was able to meet all the people in the movement who were coming through the Delta. I got to meet Jackie Robinson, which was a great thrill, and it was so much fun to tell him that as a little leaguer, I had used a Jackie Robinson bat. I still remember it had a thick handle. Everybody who came through, everybody from Stokely Carmichael to Dr. King, and it was an experience. It was fascinating. There are several stories about the movement in the book. I teach writing at Ole Miss now, and among the things I tell my students is that quotes really help make stories. You know, you can think you're a wonderful writer, but you know, if you don't have good anecdotes and quotes and good description and good stories to write about, you're going to be spinning your wheels. And I'm going to start off basically with not something I wrote, but quotes. The first one involved a visit that Dr. King made to the Delta in the spring of '68. It turned out it was the last days of his life, and he was there trying to rally support for the Poor People's Campaign. And imagine that here's a man who is a Nobel Prize winner, the major figure in the movement, and I was the only reporter covering him for a couple of days, driving around the Delta. Dr. King was with Jose Williams and Ralph Abernathy, and they drove around in a big sedan. I followed behind them in my little Volkswagen Beetle. One of the events was at a black church in Marks, Mississippi, and at that event, I was the only other white guy there. There was a photographer for the Associated Press named Jack Thornell, who had won the Pulitzer the year before for a famous picture of James Meredith when he was ambushed and shot on the highway in Mississippi, and he spread-eagled, and Jack won the Pulitzer for that. So we're there covering Dr. King, and suddenly a white guy comes bursting into the church, and he's reaching in his back pocket, and there for a split second, I had a camera and a notebook, and I'm wondering, do I try to disarm this guy, or do I get my camera ready and take the next Pulitzer Prize winning picture? Well, happily, he didn't pull a gun. He pulled a $100 bill and took it up to Dr. King, interrupted the program. Dr. King was amazed. He was looking at the $100 bill, and then he says, well, what's your name? He determined the man's name was Money Mobley. He said, well, God bless you, Brother Mobley. Anybody who gives $100 to the movement can say a few words. Well, that was a big mistake, because Money Mobley had had a few drinks by this time, and he started in on the Kennedys, and also he was denying that anybody was hungry in the South or that we had poverty. And he became so obstreperous that Jose Williams and Ralph Abernathy had to sort of frog march him out of the church, and it created quite a commotion. Afterwards, Dr. King is out in the car, and he's eating lunch, and I'm talking to him, and I said, Dr. King, were you frightened back there? And here's what he told me.